Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Neil C. Hughes, and today we're venturing into a crucial and timely discussion in the IT world. And I want to start with a question to you all. Are we on the brink of a SaaS data apocalypse? With over 30,000 SaaS applications in use globally, and the average company using 217 of them for data protection have never been higher. And yet, surprisingly, less than 10 of these applications offer enterprise-class integrated protection. And to be honest, I think that number is closer to 5. And with such a low number, combined with the fact that over half of successful ransomware attacks occurring through SaaS app usage, the urgency for a solution is palpable. So to navigate this complex landscape, today I've asked Simon Taylor, founder and CEO of HYCU or HYCU, to join me on the podcast today to talk about this. And he's also the author of a great book called Averting the SaaS Data Apocalypse. And his expertise and insights promise to shed light on this escalating problem of unprotected SaaS applications, their role in cybersecurity threats, and also what the future holds if no action is taken. So how can organisations fortify themselves against this looming crisis? Well, let's dive in to find out. So buckle up and hold on tight, because no matter where you are in the world, I'm going to be beaming your ears all the way to Boston, Massachusetts, where Simon's waiting to join us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi, Neil. It's great to be here. I'm Simon Taylor, the CEO and founder of HYCU, that's HYCU, and we're the world's fastest growing data protection as a service company focused on protecting SaaS data.
Well, it's a huge honor to have you on the podcast joining me today. And you've got a staggering number of SaaS applications in use globally. I've got to ask, what are the primary challenges that organizations are facing right now, especially when protecting and recovering SaaS data? Because we're at the magical moment of the year. Everyone's starting to look at the tech trends, the big problems that we're going to solve this year. And you've got the ear of so many big organizations. I'm curious if there are any trends in those conversations that you're having.
You know, I think when you look at the world of cybersecurity and ransomware attacks in particular, you know, one of the sort of ignored challenges that every company is facing is that there's been this explosion of what we call data silos, Neil. So if you think about the olden days, 20 years ago, you know, we probably kept our data in 4 or 5 different places, and it was primarily in your basement in a data center. Yeah. Well, today, the average company has their data in no less than 220 different data silos, because they've got it on-prem, they've got it in public cloud, but they're also keeping a tremendous amount of that data in what's called SaaS. And that software as a service sort of movement has sort of just driven up the vast number of data silos that companies deal with. Now, the problem for these companies is that with every new data silo comes a whole slew of new challenges in terms of how you protect and recover that data. And what's happening is that ransomware attackers have realized that SaaS is a major point of vulnerability for companies, and 52% of ransomware attacks today are actually executed through a customer or a victim's SaaS providers. So this means that, you know, all those friendly SaaS services that we're out there using every day all become threat vectors that we now have to protect and ensure that we can recover that data from in the event of a ransomware attack.
And I must admit, I'm going to date myself here, but when you said the good old days 20 years ago, it feels like yesterday to me.
That was a little tongue-in-cheek, but I think it goes to say, Neil, that this industry moves so fast, doesn't it?
Yes.
I mean, you know, it's almost like dog years, right? In just 20 years, we've gone from a world in which you had, you know, some IBM machines and some Oracle servers, et cetera, on-prem, to a world in which, you know, it's just exploded. You know, where people keep their data today, whether it's Google Workspace, Microsoft, whether it's Asana, whether it's GitHub, Atlassian, Okta, Salesforce, our data is everywhere, and we've lost control of it. And so I think, you know, the biggest challenge that companies are going to face this year is how they rectify that problem. How do they put their arms around that SaaS data and ensure they are protecting all of their data for on-prem, public cloud, and SaaS? And Neil, when I say protecting, what I mean is, can you recover the data if it's deleted or stolen?
And that's one of the reasons I invited you on the show today, because when I was doing a little research on you, I was reading about your views on the enterprise class protection gap, and you noted that less than 10 SaaS apps have enterprise class integrated protection. So a question I've got to ask here is, why is there such a significant gap, and what risk does this pose to organizations here in 2024 and beyond?
One of the biggest fallacies, the biggest myths in our industry today is this idea that SaaS data is already protected the moment you turn the service on. So what has happened over the last 20 years is all these SaaS services were being created is people thought, well, if I call up Salesforce and just ask for my data back, they'll just give it back to me. If I delete something, I'm sure they're backing things up. I'm sure I'll be safe. And the reality is they are backing things up. It's just not your things. They're backing up their infrastructure. They're backing up the service. In fact, every SaaS vendor in the world uses the same shared responsibility model, which essentially says that all of the service is what they are required to provide, but the data is yours to protect. So what's happened is people got lazy. They said, we don't need to protect SaaS. We're not going to worry about it. And so what the vendor community ultimately did is they said, you know what, there's 30,000 SaaS vendors in the world today. It's impossible to back all these up. We're not even going to try. And instead, they focused on-prem, they focused a little bit on cloud, and this massive area of SaaS was left completely unprotected. And as you rightly point out, if you go to the Gartner Magic Quadrant or any of these other tools, and you add up out of all of the leading data protection vendors, excluding HYCU, how many SaaS services are protected by them? The number is 5, only 5. And that's out of a universe of 30,000. So again, it's just 80% of the world's data as a result is completely unprotected. We cannot recover 80% of the world's data. And that, to me, is the biggest threat in the cybersecurity world today.
Wow, that is a scary stat. And I don't want to be too alarmist, but also if we add into that, over half of successful ransomware attacks are happening through SaaS app usage right now. So again, the question's got to be, what steps should organizations be taking to mitigate a huge risk like this?
Yeah. At HYCU, not to be too self-serving here, but one of the major challenges, the major challenge that we intended to fix in the marketplace was we wanted to create a platform that would enable you to protect all of your SaaS services. And so what we did is we realized with 30,000 vendors out there, we're not going to be able to build data protection for all of them. But what we did is we built a platform with a universal API that lets third-party SaaS vendors write to us, which means that we actually can get the unlimited time and resources we needed to go and secure all of that SaaS. So today, after launching it only 8 months ago, HYCU has on-prem public cloud and support for 50 SaaS applications, 10 times that of anybody else in the world. And we've now got 4,000 customers in 78 countries as a result. Because what's happening is people are saying to themselves, oh my gosh, I've just seen that Office 365 is not backed up. I've just realized that my Salesforce data is not backed up. And oh my goodness, I'm using Okta and Atlassian and all these other things. And what's starting to happen is as that education process takes root, people are looking for answers. And the traditional legacy data protection vendors have just not solved the problem. And I think that's what's ultimately driving people to HYCU and to using the HYCU platform to give them true end-to-end protection so they can recover that data in a time of crisis or simply because something's accidentally deleted.
And I also wanted to highlight your book, which is called Averting the SaaS Data Apocalypse. Great title. In that book, you discuss the escalating problem of unprotected SaaS data, but are there any key insights or solutions that you cover in that book that you could share with people too?
Absolutely. So I always chuckle whenever I say the name. Averting the SaaS Data Apocalypse sounds so dramatic, but the reality is that if you think about how digital we are as a world and how much of the world relies on data in order to function, it really is critical. It's life critical, not just mission critical. It's life critical, we call it. The impetus for me writing the book was actually a speech that I heard that was given by FBI Director Chris Wray And he was talking about the fact that the Boston Children's Hospital was shut down by terrorists who were able to invade the hospital through SaaS. And as a result, they actually were able to shut out children's operating procedures. Now, luckily, the FBI was on the case and they were able to fix the problem. But what it really said to me is, my gosh, we always talk about money when it comes to ransomware. But ransomware is so much deeper than money. The products and services that we use in our lives are in many ways life-saving. And so often we don't sort of follow that thread all the way through to really understand how critical it is to protect our data. And so, when I wrote the book, it was really about, this idea that there are 30,000 SaaS services. We need to understand what will happen if we don't protect this data. There's Neil, that they always say in cybersecurity, there's sort of three pillars: prevention, detection, and recovery. And the whole world's been focused on prevention and detection, which is massively expensive. And it sort of gives everyone this Superman complex, I call it, where people sort of sit around and say, they can't get me, I'm safe. Well, the reality is that we know that a majority of ransomware attacks through SaaS are successful. And part of the reason those ransoms are being paid is simply because people can't recover the data anywhere else. So, in the book, what we talk about is have a plan, audit all of your SaaS. And in fact, HYCU is created a free tool. We call it R-Graph, letter R-Graph. And what it does is it analyzes all of your SaaS services and it shows you department by department, every SaaS service you've got and whether or not it's protected and whether or not the data is recoverable. And what's amazing is, in the book, we quote the Boston Red Sox, the baseball team here in the US. And, Randy George turned it on, the VP of IT at the Red Sox. They found 900 SaaS services, 900, and they realized, my God, these things aren't protected. And right away, they start to be able to build a strategy. They have the information. If you can't see it, you can't protect it. And so the number one recommendation we have is, go to HYCU.com, turn on our graph. It's free of charge. We just want customers to empower their own organizations by understanding what they've got and whether or not they're going to be able to recover that data in the event of an attack.
What a great story. And I always try on this podcast to get people thinking differently about technology and how it impacts areas that you don't associate with technology. And I suspect that nobody listening would have put Boston Red Sox and 900 SaaS services, right?
Pretty shocking.
Yeah.
But I think it really goes to show what we call this problem of data silo sprawl.
Yeah.
Where there are just so many thousands of services we don't think about. We all know the big names, but in every industry, there are these niche SaaS services that are performing very specific functions for organizations. And the great thing about our cloud by HYCU is that, no matter what the SaaS service is, we actually have a low-code development platform. So even if we don't support the SaaS service backup today, you can actually build an integration yourself, get it turned on within 48 hours, and you can recover that data no matter where it is. So again, I think we really do need to start thinking about this as an incoming apocalypse, because as anybody who has experienced a ransomware attack knows, it is fatal. It can be fatal if you're not prepared and if you can't recover from it.
And one of the things I love about your book is it includes real-world case studies from companies widespread, from Bain Capital to the Boston Red Sox, as you mentioned there. So obviously you can't share too much, but is there any other examples you can share of how a company successfully navigated their SaaS data protection challenges, just to understand and bring it to life, the difference it can make?
Yeah. So without going into the names of customers, et cetera, here's something I will say is, we've seen a massive influx of ransomware attacks via AI, and it's basic stuff. It's phishing attacks. I mean, Neil, if somebody calls you and it sounds like your child or sounds like your boss or sounds like your business partner, you're much more likely to give them valuable, sensitive information. And, very problematically for the world, there's a lot of companies who ultimately, if you boil all of it down, they spend millions and millions of dollars on cybersecurity. But at the end of the day, there's 5 people in the company and they all have the passwords. They all have the nuclear codes. And if you are able to get a hold of one of them and convince them that you're somebody else, you can literally access anything in that entire business or organization. And this is true of governments. This is true of businesses. It's true of hospitals. And so I think that the potential for a successful attack is off the charts. It's never been this high. And what I really encourage people to do in the book is just listen, you have to think more strategically now. Stop thinking that you're going to be able to keep the bad guys out. Instead, reverse the thinking and just say, it's not if, it's when. They're going to get in. They're going to be in here. They're going to have my stuff. Can I delete it? Can I get my stuff back? Have I thought about on-prem, my public cloud data and my SaaS data? Do I even know what SaaS data I've got? And, again, without giving names, there was a very large organization that just recently went through this. And, I was so relieved. One of the best calls I've ever gotten, in my time as CEO of HYCU, somebody called me and they said, listen, we were able to recover this data. We would not have, we thought it was a sales pitch. We thought when we talked to your sellers that, it was probably a nice to have or something that, sounds really good, but we tried it. And they were not even a paying customer. They were just doing a trial of the product. And they got hit. And immediately, within moments, they were able to recover the data and they were able to say no to the ransomware attackers. They were able to say, we're not going to pay. And I think that is a great example of the power of putting yourself in the driver's seat and taking back control of your data, no matter where it is.
And of course, we are at that time of the year where every business leader is exploring doing things differently, solving some of those big problems, and also trying to identify where this is all heading. How's it all going to evolve? And I'm going to ask you to look into my virtual crystal ball now, because based on your extensive experience, I'm curious, how do you see the landscape of SaaS data protection evolving this year and indeed into next year too? Any trends that you're seeing there?
Well, I think it's going to go from being an operational and financial issue to a legal issue. Because if you look at the different frameworks, the NIST framework and some of the other frameworks that the governments are coming out with around the world, they're starting to move the liability away from the vendors and onto the consumers, the customers. And what that ultimately means is that if you're using SaaS and you're a publicly traded company, for example, in the US, and you're not backing up that data, and there is an attack, you can be liable. You can be held personally liable as the CEO of that company. So I think what we're going to see is this continued trend away from, hey, I'm going to do this because it's the right thing for my company, and all the way through to, oh, wait, my board has informed me that I have a legal requirement to make sure I'm protecting this. And the challenge that they're going to have is that there really are not a lot of options out there for protecting this massive data silo sprawl. And they're going to finally have to audit all of these different SaaS services, and it's going to be complicated. And so again, the reason why we built this star graph visualization tool is so you can see immediately where your risks are. You know where your data is, and you can start to plan how you're going to recover in the case of an event. And I think that's going to become a compliance issue and frankly, a legal issue as well.
A question I've got to ask, as the CEO of HYCU, how is your company innovating in the field of SaaS data backup and security, especially with your R Cloud and R Graph platform? Anything you can share around that and the moves that you're making?
Yeah, I think the biggest one last year was when we realized a very simple truth, which is that with 30,000 SaaS services in the world, there's no vendor, there's no data protection vendor in the world who can build backup and recovery for all of them. And the really sort of innovative approach that we took was to say, let's not try. Let's build a platform in which third parties can write integrations for us. Let's invite the SaaS services in. And what started to happen is a lot of the major SaaS vendors are calling us up and saying, I actually want my customers to be protected. I don't want to be a backup vendor. I don't want to invest 25% of my time, money, and resources into building data protection, but I don't want to hurt my customers. I don't want my service to be the result of something that damages them. So we'd love to be able to offer HYCU data protection to our customers. And they're using the R Cloud platform. They're building that integration for their service, and they're rolling that out on a global scale to their customers. And I think that's great. That's the way this should work, is that we're creating an opportunity here for SaaS vendors to provide their customers with data protection so that it doesn't become a stumbling block in their own selling process, but ultimately so that their customers have safety and protection throughout the lifetime of the usage of that SaaS service.
And finally, what advice would you give to readers of your book, listeners to this podcast, IT leaders, decision makers in organizations? What advice or key takeaway would you leave them with that would help them enhance their SaaS data protection and cybersecurity posture? Because I think there's a lot of people listening. They know what they should be doing, what they need to do, but knowing how and when, that's where things get complicated. So what's that piece of advice or key takeaway would you leave them with?
I mean, very simply, go to www.hycu.com, select rgraph, and turn on that free visualization tool. Start taking a look at really where all of your data is. And the second thing I would leave them with, perhaps, Neil, is just this. I think there are so many people out there, and I'm sure there's some listening right now, who say to themselves, this isn't true. My SaaS vendors will allow me to recover my data if I lose it. And what I always tell people is go to your Microsoft Office 365 contract. Look at page 1. Right there on page 1, it says we do not back up this data. And I think that is, you would be shocked, Neil, at how many people we meet, very, very successful CIOs, who just, because SaaS services sort of occurred so quickly and this industry has grown and changed so quickly, it just never got noticed. It wasn't even identified as a problem. So the number one wake-up call I would leave them with is just, SaaS is not backed up. You cannot recover your SaaS data. It is not in compliance with your SLAs. You need a better way. You need a different way. It's a problem that has to be addressed.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today. And I would love to see if there's something we can do for you in return as a reward for taking up some of your time today. And that is some of the biggest names in business, VC funding and tech. Even Star Trek's William Shatner have been guests on this podcast. So if there is one person that you'd love to have a private breakfast or lunch with, who would it be and why? He or she might just hear this, but let's see what we can manifest together. Who would it be?
I love this question. One of my favorite books in the last couple of years has been Amp It Up by Frank Slootman. I think he does a terrific job, and obviously he's a visionary leader, and he's just an amazing operator. But I think Mr. Slootman's inspiration in this space, building data domain, ServiceNow, and now Snowflake, he's done some great things. And frankly, every aspect of the Amp It Up book that I've read really resonated. I think makes for a very compelling read, and he would certainly be my choice for a dinner conversation.
Love that. Well, I'll send that out into the universe, into the ether. Let's see what we can manifest together. But before I let you go, for anyone wanting to check out your book, find out more information about your company, where would you like to point everyone listening?
www.hycu.com, hycu.com.
Awesome. Well, I'll get links added to that in so people can find you nice and easily. And I do urge everyone listening to check out your book, Averting the SaaS Data Apocalypse. It's not just about vision and background. There's several chapters in there of in-depth HYCU customer case studies. As I said in the podcast there, from Bain Capital to Boston Red Sox, Zebra Technologies, so many others, or should I say Zebra Technologies, as we're talking in the US today. But more than anything, just thank you for joining me and sharing your story.
Neil, such a pleasure. Great to be here.
So as we wrap up today's enlightening conversation with Simon Taylor, I think it's clear that the world of SaaS data protection is at a critical juncture. And Simon's insights, drawn from his book, Averting the SaaS Data Apocalypse, combined with his work at HYCU, I think they underscore the vulnerability of SaaS data and the imperative need for enterprise-grade protection. And I think Simon's message is simply a call to action for organisations to reassess and fortify their data protection strategies. And what a perfect time of the year to deliver that message. And finally, I think it's important to recognise that it's not just an IT concern. It is a broader business imperative, potentially even a legal compliance issue in the near future. But there's an episode for another day. So thank you, Simon, for your invaluable perspective and for joining me on the podcast today. And for everyone listening, if you've got anything you want to share, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes. As it's the start of a new year, I am begging, stealing and borrowing calls for ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So if you'd like to help the show out, I'd really appreciate that. But remember, in a world where technology is rapidly advancing, staying informed and proactive, I think, is key to navigating the challenges and harnessing those opportunities that it presents. So yes, I'm your host, Neil C. Hughes. Thank you for listening. Until next time, let's continue exploring how technology can be the solution to some of our most pressing challenges.